Coming up, my exposure to black male educators, I had zero.
On our main campus, we serve about 2,500 undergraduates, and there are 2 black male full-time faculty members.
None of my teachers were black.
Maybe 2 or 3 of my teachers look like me, we're black.
I had 2 black male teachers the entire time of my high school career.
In a population of maybe 30 teachers, I'd say maybe 2.
In my memory, I've had 1 teacher that was African American.
I was really a token. Every class that I went in, there wasn't another black person in the class.
Working in the settings that I've worked in, I could say that I've seen very few male, educators at any level.
I think that it's like part of being a black male, understanding that you're not gonna see yourself in a lot of those educational spaces to begin with. So it wasn't that I was numb to it. It wasn't that I wasn't aware of it. It was just that I was kind of like used to that. But I do understand it being difficult for a black male educator being like, yup, I wanna sign up for that,
What they see around the school is nobody that really looks like them. And if it is someone that looks like them, it's a discipline officer. It's not someone at the level of giving instruction.
America has a legacy of slavery and legal segregation that has caused African Americans to develop a negative view of themselves. Over the course of centuries, American citizens have developed oppressive mindsets and stereotypes about black people, especially young black men. In fact, black men top the list of all social groups in the black community to have the least advancement since the end of Jim Crow laws and segregation.
My primary goal was never to be a teacher. When I said never be a teacher, that being in the classroom teacher. That's why I wanted to be in business, because the whole idea was being there in the system to make money, frankly.
I never thought to be majoring in education. I thought I was going to be a priest.
Probably around middle school, I stopped telling people that I wanted to be a teacher because I kept being told that you're too smart to be an educator. And that kind of bothered me a little bit, and I felt unsure about myself. And so I felt that people were going to downplay what it is that I wanted to do, but I've always had a passion for it.
Well, the academic job market is such that they had a job open when I was finished my PhD and I applied. So it wasn't I couldn't say that it was a lifelong aspiration to teach at Yale that then came true, but it has been a really good fit for me.
Between 2008 and 2012, the number of black educators decreased by 4%, making an already minuscule group even smaller. An astonishingly low 2% of all teachers are black males. Black males make up one of the smallest demographics of American public teachers, and that number is only shrinking.
Percentage is so low because basically the education field was not something I think that was looked upon that would pay that higher salary. So a lot of folks did not go into it because of the salary.
I think that a lot of black students coming out of college, male and female, a lot of us are first generation college students, as I was, and first generation college graduates. And many people are looking for jobs that pay higher, and that will support a comfortable middle class and perhaps even upper middle class life. And since those possibilities are available, they're not going to the teaching profession because it doesn't pay.
I remember one year there was a black male who had just graduated from college. And then he said, one day, I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to get my master's. And I said, okay, that sounds better. I said, now, you told me that you want to get married and you're getting married. Now, how are you going to take care of your wife, your children, on the salary that you're going to get as a black male?
I think it is particularly important for urban students to have people in the classroom who look like them. It's even more important that they have people who are willing to invest in them, not just as a student, but really as a whole child. So if we look at all the psychological research, it shows that students perform to the expectations that we have of them. So if we get trapped in the tragedy of low expectations, that's all those students are going to do. So to have people who say, look, I know you may be dealing with challenges at home or in the neighborhood, but that cannot be an excuse for your success. Because in many ways, if you have an educator, person of color, they've overcome some personal strife as well.
I think there was a news article last year or 2 years ago that said that New Haven is like the most representative city of the entirety of America in terms of diversity. And so when you have that, and then you don't have a teacher population that reflects that, you feel it. Even if I didn't have the words in elementary and middle school, I knew that like this white woman does not look like anyone in my home or my apartments. And thus what do I, like, I don't know if what she's teaching me translates to what I do here. And I just separated my world so much because I did not see anyone that looked like me in school. And then I saw a lot of people who didn't look like my teachers at home. And so these always felt way too separate. And I think it took me a while to be like, oh, is it always going to be this separate? Do I just have to accept this? And that's something that some students develop and understand, but I don't want that to be every student's like understanding of what school and education versus home is. I want them to kind of feel like it's all their community.
Their achievement, I think, is directly related to having people that look like them in authoritative positions within schools.
Learning environments suffer when we lack black male educators. That's just the reality of it. They suffer when you have the same type of person teaching. If all you have are white teachers, if all you have are female teachers, if all you have are any one type of person doing anything, the learning environment suffers because there's a lack of a diversity of thought and of background and experience and opinion. And, I see this all the time when I see tech products being designed by big tech companies like Google. If you don't have diversity of thought and diversity of the people that are getting involved, the products may all start to feel the same after a while.
This problem began with the landmark civil rights case, Brown versus Board of Education. Many people know Brown versus Board of Education as the Supreme Court case that started on December 9th, 1952, and ended educational segregation in the United States on May 17th, 1954. Previous to Brown versus Board of Education, black children attended special black schools, while white children attended white schools. This case helped pave the way for a new era of racial equality and civil rights in the United States. However, the case was also a violation of the 14th Amendment and was therefore unconstitutional. This amendment guaranteed the rights of citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States. Brown also had an unintended side effect on one group in particular, black educators. Following the ruling in Brown versus Board of Education, hundreds of schools around the nation that served African American communities were shut down. Almost 40,000 black educators and administrators lost their jobs.
I think one of the things that is an important legacy of the Brown v. Board decision is that America's schools are more segregated now than they ever have been. And they're segregated in terms of class. So people who have money or upward mobility are less likely to send their kids to public schools or to inner city schools. We've become more segregated when it comes to language and English language learners and our support of that. But there's also a loss loss of having teachers and educators who know you as a student, who know your family, who know your community, because you go to the same house of worship or you run into each other in the supermarket, and being able to see you as a whole person, not just as a number and a statistic, it makes a difference. I think one of the greatest tragedies of Brown v. Board is that it encouraged people to become comfortable and complacent. That people thought that if they could get a degree, if they could wear their organizational affiliations on their lapel, somehow they had made it. And one of the things we've realized over the last 50 years is that those degrees don't protect us. Those titles don't shield us. And having educators who could say to people, even with your degree and your education, you have an obligation to make things better. We've lost that. People move outside of the community. They don't really connect with those grassroots-based organizations anymore. They don't get to know families. They don't get to know what it means that little Johnny is catching hell at home, and that's why he can't really pay attention in school. There is a way to affirm the importance of community without going back to the pre-Brown days of improperly funding schools based on where they are.
The kids were integrated in some places in schools where the teachers may not have had that same passion for these kids, that same belief that, yeah, you can learn and do well, right? I have expectations of you, and I'm gonna help you meet those expectations, right? That were on fire about teaching these kids, that knew these kids. So there was something lost as well.
I remember there was a teacher who used to say in my building that Brown versus Board, school integration was always one of the worst things that could have ever happened to a school. Because she feels like, and I used to look at her crazy, but after reading that article, I kind of understood what she was saying now, because there are certain things that is happening that is not part of the kids' cultures, but is part of the dominant culture, including even within discipline practices, that is not working for students.
Once we integrated into white schools. We didn't really integrate into black schools, even though those were very good models for education. So when people were going into that, they saw mostly white women in those schools. Those were mostly the people assumed as educators on the norm in America, despite the fact that most black schools had a lot of black men, like very prominent black men. W.E.B. Du Bois was a school teacher at some point in his life, and a lot of members of the Harlem Renaissance were actually school teachers at some point too. So it wasn't just like anyone who was on the street who maybe just got a high school education. It was people who got college and graduate school educations who were doing this, but people don't recognize that. And I think it's because we took all the attention away from black schools. So while I value Brown versus Board of Ed as a case that happened, the process of integration took away so much agency or control from black communities that just threw a shadow over their abilities, threw a shadow over the fact that they were educating spaces in the first place.
But what we didn't do well at doing is ensuring that all teachers knew how to educate all children. So really, even in our teacher education programs, I remember one staff meeting, I just went through Brown v. Board with my teachers, and I had a diverse teaching staff at that time. And they said, Dr. Bishop, why didn't we know about this? Why didn't we know about this policy and its impact on what we see right now, which is we see inequities, we want to address those inequities, and we want the training and the certification necessary to address those inequities. When we have all poor kids coming into our classroom, or we've got poor versus well-resourced young people, we want the strategies in order to be able to connect with all of the young people in our classroom.
Since that period, the majority of African Americans now graduate high school. Black people are nowhere near where we need to be in economic, political representation parity or educational achievement parity. But there's no way you can scientifically say that we're worse off than before Brown versus Board. Mm-hmm. If you measure it by high school dropout rates, high school graduation rates going to college, rates graduating from college and professional school. If you want to look at Brown versus Board and say that the goal is to be in an integrated school, to have whites and blacks in the same school, I think that's a different conversation than saying that we want black people to have the same educational resources that white people have. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that you have to have. There are black schools that are majority black schools that have more resources, although they're few small in number, than majority white schools. There's a concern, I think, when we think about the Brown versus Board. Much of it was about the recalcitrance and the resistance of white-controlled school districts to give black schools resources. And the only way people thought that we could get resources is that if we had black children at the white schools, that whites would provide resources for their own schools. And the only way we're going to get them is that we were at those schools. So I think that was a fundamental aim and ambition. And we've seen, I'm sure, as you found in your research, that in the last 20 plus years, there's been actually a resegregation in public schools across the United States. And many people are alarmed by that because the notion is that if there's resegregation, that it also means that these educational disparities will only become more vast, right? The gap will widen. And so there's a mixed bag of results, if you will, with the Brown versus Board. But the end is that black people are better off than we were in 1953.
The current trend of where the government is leading now, if they could dismantle the Brown versus the Board of Ed, they would do it right now. That's a fact.
Oh, J. Cole says it. J. Cole's like, yo, sometimes I think that it would be better if we were still in a segregated school. Like those segregated systems. I can see both sides of that argument. I think they reference it very much to like there was a school that was at the top of the hill. You had your black schools at the bottom of the hill. And the black schools was doing what they were doing with their community, their culture, with what it is that they had. They had a lack of resources. Lack of resources was a catalyst to be like, yo, this is unequal. What is it, like equal, separate but equal? But it wasn't. It wasn't. And so then they're like, all right, well, then we'll go ahead and we'll have some of the people that are at the bottom of the street start coming into our schools. So then they reform that, right? Brown versus Board of Education, there's resources and stuff, but no one here is up on that culturally relevant pedagogy. And when I say that like if I'm teaching in Lyman, Connecticut, on a farm, and where kids are like out riding four-wheelers, me as a black male educator is gonna become accustomed to that culture so that I could be effective in my instruction in my classroom for that particular culture, right? Not closing my mind to the other cultures, but considering what it is I need to do in that space. Didn't have it, So I think that's why sometimes that argument comes into play where it's like, sometimes segregation, like, it was better because they were rocking it. They were doing what they needed to do, even with limited resources, and they were thriving in that kind of a way. So I get that argument.
One of my mentors has said, and I think he's right about this, that America has not done public schools well since integration. And I think he's right about that. Brown versus Board of Education was the attempt to integrate the schools under the notion, which I don't quite frankly agree with, that Thurgood Marshall argued that separate is inherently unequal. That was his argument. A better argument, I think, would have been that because the schools are separate, the money, the resources are unequal. And because we are not willing to make those things equal, then we must integrate the schools. But quite frankly, we could have given the same resources to African-American schools and to white schools, and they would not have been inherently unequal. To say separate is inherently unequal is to say that Morehouse is inherently unequal to some predominantly white school. Spelman is inherently unequal to Agnes Scott because one is predominantly African-American, other is predominantly white. So I think it was a very bad argument, quite frankly, but it was the one that won the day.
But I had two sisters. Every morning, they could not go into their classroom. They had to go to the principal's office. And he will talk to them about, now, you're used to eating chitlin and pig feet and pork chop, that type of thing. They receive lectures like that every day, and then they set off in another room to get their lesson. I had to take a test when I became a senior, and would you believe the test was putting pegs in a board? I had to put the square peg in the square hole. The whole thing like that, and I really didn't like it because I thought that I was getting a test so that I could go to school, to college. And when it was over, he had an interview with me, and he told me that after looking at your test score, you will be not going to college because you're not qualified. And I'm thinking, I didn't have any reading on the test. I only put pegs in a board. So I said, well, why? He said, you're not ready. He said, what I can tell you to do, I'll give you some names of people who would like for you to work for them. A lot of ladies need someone to take care of their children, clean the house, and cook for them. And I said, okay, thank you. And I went back to my room and I told my mother. My mother told me I did exactly right, and she asked me, do I want to go to college? And I said, yes, I do. So I put in the application, and I received a teacher's scholarship, and I was able to go to college. Our history is not told. It is not being presented correctly. I'll give you an example. In Vallejo, there was a white teacher teaching her class, and she was teaching that slavery was not bad at all. The slave complained a lot, but they enjoyed it. And you know, that's a lie right out of pit of hell. Slaves did not like eating off the ground. They did not like being beaten. Being raped, killed. Tell me what is likable about that? So they lie about our history.
Since Brown, there has almost never been a nationwide increase in black male educators. Certain regions of the United States see decreases, and others see increases from decade to decade. Despite its positive effect for students, Brown versus Board of Education was a watershed moment that led to a nationwide decrease of black male educators that still continues today.
Well, I think one of the issues in terms of awareness is helping people to understand why it's a problem that we don't have more black male educators. What does it send as a message to young people that the only time they encounter black men in schools is when they've gotten in trouble and they've been sent to them to discipline? It creates the expectation that black men are there in an adversarial role.
They allow them to do that. They should not be allowed to do that. They're not there to discipline. You have to demand respect. The kids are not going to respect you unless you demand respect. Don't send a child to me telling me that, oh, he's tapping on his desk with his pencil. But if that child is getting his work and he's tapping on his desk with the pencil, why is he in the principal's office?
I think a lot of our students are misunderstood. I think that when a taller, darker male stands up, strong, because he's been, raised to be strong and carry the load and, be the father figure in the household because they lack the father figure. I feel like people are intimidated by that role, but their parents raised them to be that figure and to stand up for what they think is right or wrong. I think a lot of our students may not know how to disagree appropriately sometimes because they weren't taught the skill on how to disagree appropriately. And I think that anytime a student is not doing something right, we need to do corrective teaching and teach them the behavior and not internalize students' behavior.
Besides the fact that they're pushed into those jobs even outside of schools, was the issue with, we see these black kids' bodies as possibly violent or possibly erratic, and we need other strong black people's bodies to control them or stop them.
I think that people are motivated by recompense. I think that people are thinking, if I want this quality of life, what profession will afford me access to those things I want in life. So some people might think, I could be a social worker and it'll be great. I could be a school teacher, it could be great, but I'm not going to make money or enough. And so I won't do that. And so those who are in college might be more likely to go into, like, business is the #1 major for Black and white college students. And I think it's because, Black and white college students are thinking, business will be the opportunity for me to, get the things that would enrich my life in a material way.
We're definitely underpaid in what we do. We're undervalued in what we do. And, when you're thinking of, I know when I guide my students into picking careers, the #1 thing that we talk about is, what's a yearly salary that you want to make? What are you looking at as far as a lifestyle? What are you seeing yourself doing, as far as vacation time, time of year that you want to work? Where do you see yourself working? What type of environment do you see yourself working in? All these kinds of things, I think, are big factors in picking a career. And whether, the makeup of what an educational setting looks like is interesting to, Black males or not is probably the question I would look at a little bit more as far as, why aren't they coming into the field?
A male is typically thought of as the breadwinner for a family, especially in thinking about traditional roles. And so how can I support my family depending on where you're living? Some educators make a fair amount, and in some places educators don't. If I'm making $35,000 a year and I have a master's degree, is it really going to be enough to support my family? And I'm talking about when I have 2 kids and my wife no longer wants to work while she stays at home with the kids. That's a lot on a family.
We need to think differently about education and how we pay for it in this country. We need to pay higher salaries to these positions so that there are a lot of people, I think, I've heard of, who want to go into teaching, but they don't pay enough. So they go to law school, or they go to med school, or they go to business school, and those sort of things. I mean, the school system should be paying for the materials that the students need. Teachers shouldn't have to come out of their pockets, and particularly when you're paying them so little, to pay for material that students need in school. It just makes no sense.
I feel like a lot of our students have trust issues growing up in the educational system, and that has a lot to do with why they steer clear away from being educators. I think if they had great educators and made connections, that would encourage them to be educators. So that's why I feel like this job is important to us, because maybe I'll make a connection with a student that says, you know what, I want to be that kind of person when I grow up and have the same connection as Mr. Jones did with his students.
Something happens. They have experiences that seem to take away that joy of school. It could be feeling like this teacher doesn't like me. This teacher disrespects me. This teacher has a stereotype about me. And those experiences can take away the joy that that child had when they first started school.
You can't become what you can't see. It's hard to aspire to become someone that you don't see every day or see them as part of the foundation of your education.
I certainly think that part of the answer to your question is that there's a sort of a systematic disselection, let's say, a systematic way in which Black men are made to feel, Black people are made to feel that they don't have as much to contribute, that whatever knowledge they have somehow isn't universal enough. There are studies that will track the ways Black men and women are called on or not, are treated as problem or not, or criminalized from a young age. And a former colleague, someone who just recently left, has done studies on specifically about the ways that interactions with the police discourage interaction with their government, from voting to receiving state aid. And so I have to assume that something similar happens in education, that the more you're either criminalized or made to feel that your contributions are unruly, the less likely you are to want to stay in the classroom and continue to work that hard within a system that doesn't seem to want you or to value you.
So I think it's important for young kids to see people who look like them, but it's even more important that they see people who believe in them and see them as potential and possibility and not just as a problem. And I think it's important for kids, not just for Black kids to see Black teachers, but for non-Black students to see people of color in those positions as well. It gives them a sense of the ability to overcome stereotypes so that they understand people can succeed in whatever field they choose. It helps them to understand that being proud of who you are doesn't mean that you can't invest in other people. But I also think it's important for our schools to reflect the communities that we live in. And if we live in an increasingly diverse community, an increasingly diverse world, we need to start that very early on for kids in education.
And I think when we can create a consciousness, not just amongst Black males, but amongst Black females, that the most powerful driving force in a nation are educators, and rebrand it as such, then the market will increase on what we pay them.
There's a dearth of role models in many schools as well. I think many schools don't have enough African American male teachers that can be role models for young men. I think if there were more African American male teachers, then there may be more boys that might think that this is a profession that they might want to pursue.
I would suggest that we need to create unique structures that are affirming for African American males to recruit them into the profession, number one. How do we attract African American males who have gone to college, are highly recruited for other spots, whether it's in the tech world or other places where we are needed or that diversity is needed? And how do you make teaching the profession that they choose? What is it about you that you with a Juris Doctorate would choose to be a teacher, right? And so we have to really tap into that spirit of our young African American male teachers. And I think we have to do a better job of ensuring that our young boys recognize that presence of the African American male teacher, and that they can then one day perhaps aspire to be an African American male teacher.
Well, I think teacher cadet programs need to happen a little more in school districts where, you know, we have male teachers, and it doesn't matter if they're Black or white, but I feel like you need to have teachers making a connection with these young students and letting them know how to become a teacher, the benefits you have to becoming a teacher, even break down the salary of in the summers and the time off. I think kids are afraid that they're not good enough leaders. They don't have the confidence to be leaders. And I feel like if they made a connection and had a great mentor, that they would be okay being a leader in the classroom. You know, when our students when they look for success, they look in the community and they look on TV, and whatever those, you know, adults are doing, that's who they gear towards. So a lot of African American men are either athletes, rappers, and making tons of money, and kids are looking at those students or athletes as positive role models and gearing themselves to, oh, I want to play hard like him so I can make this kind of money. I feel like if teachers made the same connection and we had a draft for teachers and, you know, the highest paid teachers got, you know, the best teachers got the highest paid salary, kids would jump on that gravy train also.
We want kids to see that being an educator is something powerful, something that they should aspire to do. How do we do that? We make learning second to none. We make it exciting. We make it something that every day kids want to come back to and say, that's what I want to do when I want to grow up. I want to impact kids. I want to change the future. I want to make the world brighter than it is today.
I think, you know, students or kids, you know, they get ideas of what they should be or what types of careers they should be interested in based on, you know, what they hear around them, you know. And I think if we want to strengthen, education even more, then, that's what we should be talking about even more. When we, as educators are in a classroom and we see, we always know who that student is, who's a leader, who's able to, help another student, who can take a concept down and really break it down and explain it to another student and get that student to understand and really be that help to that student. That's your future educator. That's the student that somebody should say to, hey, you do a really good job at explaining things. Like, do you ever think about being a teacher?
I think ultimately I keep coming back to us needing to be relevant. Like, we still operate off of agrarian school schedule. We don't farm like that anymore. We still rocking like the summers off. Like, we don't even have pre-trips, like, on average for the public school system. We don't have pre-trips where we get together and form a team and go on a hike and sleep out under the stars and get to know each other like that before we actually come into the classroom space. We still got cold rows in classrooms. People walk into this space and they're like, what is this, a cafe? I want to reinvent what education looks and feels like. So that's like the big systematic thing. That's like scheduling why does everyone still come to school at the same time? Why do we still have like kids coming in from 8 and leaving at 2:45 when some students need to come in at 8 and leave at 1 and then go be with a professional in the field that they're interested in, shadowing them for a portion of the day, and then coming back to the community and presenting on, like, it's so scrambled. So the issue, I think, is keeping your mind aligned with the fact that there's dopeness in being an educator. Like for me, like, I would never give it up because I get to step in the room every day and influence that change. Every time I step inside my classroom, it's a civil rights act. Fight oppression by teaching lessons to students that give them wisdom to fight back. The youth be the true hope. Forget the future. They the leaders of now. And I suggest adults take notes. We're sick and tired of these institutions bleeding us out, especially if you trans, gay, black, or you brown, especially if you a female holding it down, or if you mentally ill, deaf, blind, or if you wheelchair bound. Now don't you try to beam me up, Scotty. I got a purpose to serve, lyrical church. You can worship the words, and I don't claim to be a god or nothing. I just aim to be the man that my father wasn't. So like teaching is dope.
Who better to teach Black history than Black history? Some think I may learn better or learn more from someone that looks like me. Yet those that look like me in education is something we rarely see. Black men make up only 2% of the education system. Ironically, more often than not, when we give our 2 cents, we can usually get 100% to listen. Kids may respond better to those who know of or have experienced what they go through. But nowadays we have to consider what they're exposed to. There's more drugs and less hugs, more crooks and less books, more black men in corrections and probation, less to correct them or even raise them. Black men, the vacation is over. The excuses are done. We need more black men raising and teaching our sons in the classroom and the streets. We gotta stop letting stereotypes speak for us. If we assemble an army of educated black men, then how can they ignore us? We won't just march and scream. We will be an articulate chorus of educators chasing Martin's dream, as we have dreams too. But there's only a handful of teachers that look like me, so we need you to help us teach our kids to be great, and being great is teachable. And we're calling on each of you, black men, stand up. Our kids have been needing you for decades. This isn't about a paycheck, it's a reality check. When I asked the young lady how she felt about black men in education, she said, I thank those that are out there, but we need more. The government doesn't recruit black men to teach, but will recruit them for war. They hire us and place us in classrooms where the students aren't listening. Seems like we're only seen as being good as deans of discipline. Black men, we are the educators of the masses. Doctors, lawyers, and chemists all took classes that had teachers. Even your favorite athlete needed a coach, aka a teacher, that taught them how to reach for success, to never give up and to keep fighting until they win. A teacher taught me how to dribble a ball and a ballpoint pen. Black men, this is bigger than just hoop dreams. There is a world full of youth dreaming for someone that looks like them. This is bigger than Brown versus Board of Education. We need more Brown on the Board of Education so they can put more Brown at the board in education. And didn't class start with the blackboard anyway? But when blacks get bored in education, some give people a different reason to use the chalk. Black men, we are more than just an outline. We are the front line of revolution. Black men, We are more than the revolution. We are an institution of hope, of dreams, of nightmares turned success stories. We tie ties, Timbs, and do-rags. We are a combination of triumph, tribulation, and glory. We are the foundation where our youth will stand. We are a band of brothers. We will always be our brother's keeper. It's time we band together so we can be our children's teachers too.